Chapter 6 is entitled The Socio-Relational Context. What we mean by that term is simply membership in groups and how that group membership affects communication. Intercultural communication can be considered to be a group phenomenon experienced by individuals. That is to say that when we enter into a conversation, we look at that individual as a member of a group, and that has a strong effect on how that conversation is going to go. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about groups from a variety of perspectives. We're going to start by talking about kinds of groups and membership. The second topic will be roles and hierarchies in groups. Then we're moving on to family groups, and finally gender groups. So we're going to start by talking about membership in groups, and there are membership groups and non-membership groups. So we're talking about in groups in which you are a member. You may be a member of that group whether you want to be or not, because you were born into a family, you were born with a certain gender. But there are also voluntary membership groups, and so you choose what political affiliation you have, your religion, what job you're going to be doing. Economic status may not be voluntary, may depend on factors outside of your control, but the textbook points out that in some countries those memberships that are voluntary in the United States are not. In China, for example, you don't have the option to belong to a variety of political parties. There's only one. In Saudi Arabia, you don't have the option to belong to a variety of churches or religions. There's only one choice there. Non-membership groups are ones that you can't belong to. The example given in the text, and that we're going to talk about a little bit more in this chapter, is India. With the caste system, you can't change what caste, which is your social group, you can't change that. You're born into that. In-groups and out-groups is something that's used quite a bit in talking about communication in reference to groups, and I think it's pretty clear what the meaning is of those terms. In-group is a group that has aspirations, norms, values that are shared by its members, and in some cases these in-groups can become extreme in their orientation, in their opposition to out-groups, and then you have nationalism, extreme nationalism. An out-group is a group that has opposing values, that tends to be a group that is dissimilar, tends to be also a group that can be threatening in some way to the in-group. Whether another person that you encounter is a member of an in-group or out-group may actually depend on the context. So there might be somebody that I know that I really don't like at all. He's not a member of my group. He's different in all kinds of ways from me. Maybe he's belongs to a different fan club, likes a different sports team, practices a different religion, goes to a different university, blah, blah, blah. It's very different. Well, if I encounter that person in my hometown, I'm not going to have anything to do with him. But what if I run into him on the streets of Paris? Well, maybe there's a certain solidarity there that's made, and you kind of instantly form a temporary in-group that includes both of you. In-group bias is what we refer to when you see the same behavior being judged differently or in a opposing way by members of your own group versus members of groups that you don't belong to. And this is this in-group bias is a well-known phenomenon in social psychology. We're going to look at group coherence, that is to say, how members of groups show that they belong and show who's in and who's out. So we're going to look at a short clip and then we'll talk about that.
Because it's so important to demonstrate some kind of tribal membership, to set the individual apart from the teeming masses, the modern tribesman adopts a wide variety of tribal uniforms that display his particular allegiance. The black leather of these Hell's Angels and the striped blazers at Henley Regatta are instantly recognizable as tribal badges. If the tribesman displays the right badges, he labels himself to the world as a member of one particular group. Sharing his costume, his manners, his form of speech and his colors with those around him, he feels strengthened by the shared display. It excludes non-members and gives him a sense of tribal identity and power. Even when the tribal signals are rather mild, sharing the same display makes members of the group feel more confident, more at ease. As a way of forging the tribal bond, some groups demand an initiation ceremony. This ancient tradition survives today even in the most advanced cultures. Obediently, these new recruits to a Japanese electronics company chant the song of their new tribe. In a shared ordeal, they're introduced to the tribal elders who are suitably elevated on a special platform. And in unison, they display their newly acquired subservience to the might of the company.
When I get to 3, do it.
Here in Los Angeles, a group of female gang members from one of the feared city gangs is also initiating a new recruit. The function of this tribal ordeal is precisely the same, but the form it takes is very different.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, kicker, 24, kicker, 30, kicker, slug on the face, 29, 30, stop.
After enduring 30 seconds of physical abuse, she's accepted as a fully fledged member of the gang.
That's right. How do you feel, Holmes? Great. I'm down and crazy.
This clip is from a series called The Human Animal by Desmond Morris. Started out as a zoologist, evolutionary biologist, and then got into social anthropology. So that's his point of view, particularly looking at biology and zoology, and so that's why in talking about groups he uses the word tribe. So he's talking about the human animal, so humans as evolving from animals. And you saw in that clip ways in which groups distinguish themselves. They might be riding on motorcycles and having a certain appearance, might even wear a uniform, gang colors, identify gang members. And they can also have different customs, different ways of speaking, different nonverbal behavior, nonverbal language, as well as behavior as well. The indicators of in-group membership have the effect of strengthening the cohesion of the group and inciting individual loyalty. At the same time, they lock out members, people who are not members, because it's immediately evident They're not on a motorcycle. They're not wearing a leather jacket. They don't have a lot of tattoos. So they're not members of my particular gang. And how you become a member of a group is often through some kind of initiation ritual. We saw some examples of those, very different in Japan and in a gang setting. Reference groups are groups that you may or may not belong to, but which you identify with in some way, and these can be positive or negative. And these can be groups that we look up to, but we can't join. So maybe you really like to be a member of the Mensa Club, which is the exclusive group for people with really high IQs, but you can't join it. Or maybe you'd like to be a member of the Avengers. Can't do that either. But it might be a group that you look up to and might be able to join in the future. Maybe you'd like to be a minister in a church. Maybe you'd like to be a college professor. Maybe you'd like to be a lawyer. So you are interested in those groups. You learn about those members of the group and what it takes to become a member of that group. And sometimes these reference groups can simply be sources of information or opinion. So political parties, for example, if you're a member, will tell you who to vote for. And in the United States, some examples of reference groups might be the Tea Party or the Occupy movement. Maybe you're not actually a member of those groups, but maybe you get some political ideas and identify with those groups in some way. Roles. If you're in a group, you probably have some role in that group. Maybe you're a leader, maybe you're just a member, but there are expected set of behaviors, verbal and nonverbal behaviors, and there might be formal roles. So you might be the president, you might be the secretary, depends on the kind of group we're talking about. And violations of formal roles can lead to removal. So for politicians, you might be impeached. There might be a referendum to vote on outing you from that office. And there are informal roles as well. And in general, these are things that are not written down, that you learn from experience and from being a member of a particular culture. Informal roles kind of interesting in the United States, more so I think than in other cultures. In recent decades, informal roles are actually learned from professional experts. So we have lots of books and TV experts on things like how to date, how to raise a baby, how to be a good parent. We have a profession called a life coach, how to lead your life, even have professional organizers, all kinds of things that help us perform what are really informal roles. Roles are prescribed with whom, about what, and how we communicate. We've talked about social identity in the past as being distinct from cultural identity. Social identity refers to what groups you're a member of and what roles you perform in that group. And these certainly vary across cultures. We're going to be looking at that in this chapter. And how you define a role, generally there are a number of factors there that have been identified by scholars in the field. One is to what extent is this a personal or impersonal kind of role? How distant is the relationship? The role might be one that's very formal, but it might be very casual as well. There might be a strict hierarchy, and there may or may not be allowance for being different from what the role prescribes. Let's give an example of that. The relationship defined by being a child, being a son or daughter. Well, you probably have a fairly personal relationship to your parent, not an impersonal one, but in some cultures actually that there may be not the kind of closeness that one has in a typical American family. Might be in fact a formal kind of relationship that one might have. The same is true of the role of the parents versus the role of the child. That might be fairly democratic. There might not be much difference, or the hierarchy might be very strict, and the father may make all the decisions and you just have to follow. And there may be some room for being not the ideal son or daughter. That may be okay in a family, or it may not be. This quote in reference to Korea, "One should not step even on the shadow of one's teacher," shows how different that role of the teacher is in Korea. I don't think probably too many American students would see that as defining their relationship with their teacher, the extreme respect that indicates. Role differentiation and stratification, what we're talking about is what roles there are within a culture and how those are structured. And this varies quite a bit from culture to culture and from the kind of society, whether it's a fairly developed society or not. And it tends to be that in collectivistic cultures that there tends to be a fairly strict hierarchy that's based on age and whether one is a man or a woman, what family one comes from, what job one has, and where one is in the work hierarchy. What tends to happen as well in collectivist cultures is that there are certain ritual conversations that take place. This is the nature of high context cultures, and verbal and nonverbal messages are often prescribed. And how the roles and ranks are recognized varies significantly across cultures, and we're going to look at some examples now in a short clip about group status displays, and then we'll talk about that.
This gathering of senior Maasai in East Africa demonstrates social levels rather neatly. They arrange themselves in 3 rows: higher status at the front, middle status in the center, and lower status at the back. In the front row sit the tribal elders. The chief himself displays his rank by his ebony staff. And all the elders show off their fly whisks and their elongated, decorated ears. In the second row, the junior elders have their elongated ears wrapped up in readiness for the day when they'll graduate to the front row. And in the third row sit the warriors, who display their rank by holding erect their sharp spears. Each culture has its own special forms of status display, and it's not always easy for outsiders to anticipate the subtle rules that are in operation in any particular case. If we were invited to this Japanese boardroom, we might easily sit in the wrong chair. Every position is carefully worked out, the precise rank of each executive being defined by his distance from the managing director. This boardroom is a status minefield. If we were served with tea, we might unwisely take a sip straight away. But in this delicately structured world, we'd be committing a social gaffe. The managing director must drink first. Then each of his executives may drink in turn according to their relative seniority. In this streamlined high-tech world, it's necessary to become skilled at the nuances of correct behavior and status etiquette. Watching body language can give us a special insight into status relations. Here, the manager on the right is unconsciously mimicked in almost every action he makes by the junior executive. Cheek scratch, cheek scratch. Arms fold, arms fold. Nose wipe, nose wipe. Head nod, head nod. And when the senior man smokes a cigarette, the junior does his best, putting his empty fingers to his lips.
So the examples that we saw showed, first of all, a African tribe, Maasai people from Kenya, and you saw the seating arrangements there indicative of a gerontocracy, in other words, a culture in which the hierarchy is based on age, and you saw the different concrete symbols of where one is in that hierarchy. Then you saw a very different culture in Japan that has very elaborate rituals in terms of its business culture, and very different than American business culture. What one sees often in a variety of cultures is that the status of the individual, high status person, is raised up physically higher, so might be wearing some kind of headgear like a crown or a mitre, or might be sitting up on a throne like the queen or the king. And we're going to stop at this point and move on to the Indian caste system in our next presentation.